In episode 6, Lois and Clark go together to find Jimmy after not returning his calls and not just being found anywhere usual. And they put aside their, beef with the whole secret identity and lying stuff to go look for him in the woods where his last video was filmed for his YouTube channel. During all this, Jimmy wakes up in some sort of secret lab full of high-tech equipment where he is strapped to a chair and almost being dissected by some automatic sort of tools before he is met with the two people behind this operation, a large sentient gorilla and a spherical floating robot with arms and a brain inside it. They stop the operation to talk to Jimmy, and he convinces them not to dissect his brain. Being such a big lover of unsolved sci-fi UFO sort of stuff, and mentioning how Lois and Clark haven't spent time with him and are kind of ignoring him, so the gorilla kind of does it almost out of pity. The gorilla then introduces the two of them as Monsieur Malin and the Brain, as he introduces Jimmy to all of the cool, top secret sort of alien and supernatural stuff hidden on this base of theirs, despite the Brain's, protests over this. Jimmy is delighted by all of the interesting things that he is, currently looking at, including the Loch Ness Monster, which is, I guess, kind of stuffed and hung up on the ceiling, some sort of sound gun hung up on the wall, and a few other things. He, yet again mentions how his friends aren't really, supportive at the moment. So clearly, Monsieur is a little sad about that, or at least pitying him a bit. So he shows him more stuff and also tells him his story, how this base used to be actually well maintained by scientists back in the 80s, and they make sure it's the 80s by having the flashback be shown through a letterboxed sort of aspect ratio with an old TV sort of filter to it all, like the like more I guess sort of grain or whatever to the video. And on top of that, we got the lead scientist who's got flowing hair and a open shirt, which is also very 80s. There we of course get an explanation on how the gorilla got made super smart, how other things were made, and how they were working on a black hole inside the facility. Unfortunately, a bunch of unknown armed men came into the facility trying to stop things, and through all of that the black hole was made unstable and sort of sucked all kinds of people into it, including the lead scientist who the gorilla has wanted to sort of bring back or something like that. Meanwhile, Lois and Clark are looking through the forest, looking for Jimmy, of course, when they find a nice fence gate, or metal fence gate, blocking their progress, but thankfully there is a hole on the lower side of one of the fences that Jimmy seemed to have crawled through before. And while getting in there, Clark starts feeling weird like something's happened to him while he's in there, but he can't really explain it. Lois finds Jimmy's phone and also looks at the last filmed video that he took before he was kidnapped, where he's, bringing up Area 52, which is apparently where they are currently, and also shows a bit of him getting kidnapped by the gorilla. So, of course, Lois and Clark, try to make their way further through the area to try and find Jimmy, while also coming to little bits of arguments over Clark's secrets again. During this, they also are attacked by some robots who, chase after them, some floating robots and some crawling ones, and also the, fully built sort of mechs that Clark has come across before. Thankfully, some of them are taken care of by random laser-based booby traps that Lois and Clark set off themselves and are able to, not get hit by, but instead the robots. However, at one point they do come across a laser turn gun that is trained on Lois, but Clark gets in the way and is hit by a barrage of lasers that burn off his shirt, and eventually stops firing, as it's now too hot to keep firing. We then, of course, see just how muscular Clark is under the dorky shirts and sweaters and whatever else he usually wears. Then Lois asks Clark if he knew he was bulletproof, to which he replies that he didn't, but he knew she wasn't. Later, Clark and Lois finally make it to the entrance of the base, where they find a huge hole kind of going through pretty much the entire thing, inward-wise, which, is kind of a cool visual. And while they're at the front, they are blocked by the Brain, who is now in a bigger mech suit, planning to take them out. And Monsieur is also there, but Jimmy comes in to stop any fight from happening. And of course he, then mentions that Lois and Clark are the, quote, friends he's been talking about. And then Monsieur decides to let them, just talk it out, and he and the Brain go back inside. To which, a little arguing starts, but, Lois and Clark apologize about not having spent time with Jimmy enough in the last few days. And Clark especially apologizes and tries to reveal to him that he is Superman, but Jimmy stops him and says that he already knows, which Clark, of course, is shocked by. And Jimmy then, tells him how he knows, that being from the first day they met in college, where Clark accidentally ripped off a door handle and passed off as the screws being loosed, even though apparently the door handle was completely ripped in half and not even anything looking like, screws being loose. And that's also when, Jimmy finds out Lois knew and, thinks Clark had told her himself and not what actually happened, but they don't really get into that at the moment. During that, the robots that were chasing them have finally caught up, and it turns out that they are not at all robots from the facility, but from somewhere outside. Everyone gets back into the base, and Clark, blocks the door that he had already opened with, brute force, with some big piece of, concrete. But it ends up not being enough as the robots push through, but they start fighting them off, and also running deeper into the facility until they make it to the black hole room, where Monsieur decides to kind of get rid of the robots while also testing a theory about the black hole and how to stabilize it. That being to fill it to its mass capacity. So they, hit some switches, and while, Clark is helping with that, Lois and Jimmy, talk to him more about that, about, being Superman and not telling them. And he says, his full reason is that he just wanted a normal life and felt that all they would see is an alien if he did tell them. And Jimmy proceeds to tell Clark that they care about him, because he is Clark and not because of who he is or because of what he is. Which, is a nice moment. Clark then, turns the switch on. Mansoor helps more, and then the black hole is fully open and starts sucking all kinds of things into it, including the robots, pieces of the room itself, and almost starts sucking in everyone else. Thankfully, Clark is able to hold on to a bar and also, hold on to everyone else before, the black hole finally stabilizes, and they are able to fall back onto the platform in front of it, and we see that it's kind of this glowing white sphere that's kind of rippling and moving around a bit compared to the more stable looking glowing black sphere from before. After that, Clark, Lois, and Jimmy leave the base and say goodbye to Francois and the Brain as they plan to kind of take care of the black hole, or the stabilized black hole. And Lois puts on her jacket onto Clark, saying how he's got no shirt, and they end up holding hands while Jimmy's saying his goodbyes to the two mad scientists. And eventually they leave, and we see the two mad scientists going towards the black hole that has now apparently stabilized into a portal to another world. And they both, kind of go in, hoping for great adventure to await them. Then at the very end, after all of that, we see the General, or Rick Flag, standing inside the room with all of the different, bits of tech littered around and all this destroyed stuff. And behind him is Dr. Ivo, who is now recovered from his injuries from before, and the General convinces him to join him and, help him out in exchange for revenge on Superman. And of course, he very much accepts this deal, and we also see that out of all of the damage he did receive, he also has like this black and purple eye in one of his eyes, which could suggest that he is got some of the tech inside him instead of just simply damaging him, which could mean that he is going to be yet another classic Superman villain. And that was episode 6, a really good one, pretty much like all of them. I guess I sort of liked it a bit more than the last one, just because it, moved along a little bit, but that didn't mean the last one was any less good. I just preferred this one a slight bit. I'm really glad that they didn't do what a lot of shows would do, where they drag out the drama between Clark and Lois, but instead they get past their differences for a little bit, and then they eventually talk and just try to figure this whole thing out without, being childish about all of it, which is kind of a breath of fresh air. I don't see many shows of this caliber or this style that actually do that. I think the best part of this episode is how it is both a Clark-centric episode and a Jimmy-centric episode. It really doesn't have any Superman at all, other than the mention of Superman. And then, of course, Jimmy has a big part to play, having, spent time with these two mad scientists and, letting his feelings out a bit, especially to Clark and Lois, and how he feels and how he wants to, actually spend time with them instead of them getting wrapped up in, work and all that. So it'll be interesting to see how their dynamic, turns out after all of them now knowing that Clark is Superman, and of course, him knowing that they know, and how that could change things up a bit. It'll be interesting for sure. And then, of course, interesting to see how things turn out with all of these different, villains coming together with Task Force X, and how they'll all work together to take down, or try to take down, Superman. I'm going to give episode 6 an 8 out of 10. I hope you enjoyed this review of My Adventures with Superman as usual. Maybe check out some of the other reviews if you haven't and you're just checking this out. Maybe also make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'd appreciate that. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Take care.